Managing invasive plants in Florida's lakes. You're listening to The Wrap from Central Florida Public Media. I'm Brendan Byrne. Millions of dollars in state funding is coming down the pipeline to control the spread of invasive aquatic plants like hydrilla in Central Florida lakes. Hydrilla often blocks sunlight from other native plants, but some worry the damage from chemicals used to treat it is even worse. Jason Farrell, director of the Center for Aquatic and Invasive Plants at the University of Florida's Institute for Food and Agricultural Sciences, says hydrilla can make flooding worse.
So where you have a lot of hydrilla in your water conveyance canals, you can have severe flood risk because you simply cannot get the water dropped and moved in a timely fashion.
Farrell says hydrilla can be good in moderation, but because it grows so quickly, that balance is difficult to strike. A look at those efforts. That's ahead on The Wrap. But first, these news headlines. Cyber attacks targeting medical records are on the rise. Last week, the Florida Department of Health confirmed its records for birth and death certificates were compromised. Central Florida Public Media's health reporter Joe Mario Pedersen finds in Florida, 18 of this year's 19 documented cyber attacks have been healthcare related.
Ransomware attacks, efforts by hackers to steal electronically stored information, increased by 18% nationally in 2023, according to FBI statistics. Kevin Butler is the director of the Florida Institute for Cybersecurity Research. He says hackers are targeting healthcare operations because the penalties for releasing that data is high, giving victims an incentive to pay off the attackers.
And a lot of federal legislation gets involved, or regulations like HIPAA and the like. So I could be out of compliance if my data gets stolen, and that data has become accessible to others.
It's unclear which records were affected, but Butler says it's likely residential passport and social security information was taken in the attack. He advises residents to monitor their financial and credit records for any unusual activity. Joe Mario Pedersen, Central Florida Public Media.
Experts at Colorado State University increased their storm forecast for what was already expected to be an above-average hurricane season. The university's Department of Atmospheric Science added 2 named storms and a major hurricane to its outlook for the 2024 season, which started June 1st and runs through November. The department said it needed to slightly increase projections because of near-record warm Atlantic and Caribbean waters and a lack of strong vertical wind shear that helps temper hurricane development. Warm waters fuel hurricanes, including Hurricane Beryl and short-lived tropical storms Alberto and Chris. The department's forecast now calls for 25 named storms this season, up from 23 when the forecast was first released in April. The city of Orlando announced this week the 18 people who will serve on its Pulse Memorial Advisory Committee. They include 5 who lost family members in the Pulse nightclub massacre 8 years ago. Among the rest are survivors of the mass shooting, former Pulse employees, artists, architects, and other professionals. They'll have a public meeting every month starting July 24th. The goal is a conceptual design by the end of the year for a permanent memorial at the Pulse site, honoring the 49 people who lost their lives. These stories and more on our website. Visit cfpublic.org. This is an election year. What local issues do you care about? What concerns you? Do you have questions about the process of voting? What about issues on the ballot? Well, Central Florida Public Media is listening. Your questions will help shape our election coverage this year. Let us know what you want to know. Click the green Let Us Know button under Vote 2024 at cfpublic.org. Millions of dollars in state funding is coming down the pipeline to control the spread of invasive aquatic plants like hydrilla in Central Florida lakes. Hydrilla often blocks sunlight from other native plants, but as Central Florida Public Media's environment reporter Molly Durig reports, some worry the chemicals used to control it are causing even more damage.
That squishy sound is hydrilla, an underwater plant. Longtime angler Scott Wilson is out on his fishing boat on Orange Lake in Marion County, squeezing some hydrilla he just scooped up.
It's here, but it's not healthy.
This hydrilla sounds kind of like a sponge. Wilson says that's not good, and neither is the plant's color.
See where it's brown, that's where something's gotten to it.
Wilson says likely a chemical herbicide. The Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission uses herbicides to control invasive aquatic plants like hydrilla, which grows incredibly fast, blocking sunlight from other plants.
You hear it snap?
That's how Wilson says hydrilla is supposed to sound. crispy when you break it apart.
This hydrilla up here is doing what it's supposed to be doing, is filtering the water.
State and federal data show Orange Lake is polluted with excess nutrients like phosphorus and nitrogen, which means it's not suitable for things like swimming and fishing. Wilson blames the chemical herbicides used to manage invasive aquatic plants. He says he thinks the state's using those herbicides too aggressively, polluting Florida lakes and killing off wildlife.
I've seen lakes go from some of the most phenomenal unknown bass fisheries on the planet to being absolutely mud pit within the matter of 1 or 2 years of constant spraying.
Many fishing and outdoors enthusiasts in Central Florida echo Wilson's concerns. The Environmental Protection Agency says herbicides can be toxic, and when plants die in the water, that decaying plant material builds up into a dark muck.
Herbicides are never the only way to manage plants, so it is a way.
That's Jason Farrell, director of the Center for Aquatic and Invasive Plants at UF-IFAS, University of Florida's Institute for Food and Agricultural Sciences. He says herbicides are designed for specific uses and go through lots of tests. Still, he recognizes they pose some risk.
The risk is never zero for anything we're putting into the environment.
It's the same idea with hydrilla itself. Farrell agrees the plant can benefit lakes in moderation.
The problem, though, is how do you maintain moderation?
Farrell says it's tough with a plant that can grow as fast as 191 inches a day. When hydrilla starts growing in a lake, it basically takes over.
Think of a tree with a trunk and then a big canopy. That is what hydrilla does. So one plant can end up covering thousands of square feet,
suffocating native plants below. And in hurricane season, hydrilla presents another problem.
So where you have a lot of hydrilla in your water conveyance canals, you can have severe flood risk because you simply cannot get the water dropped and moved in a timely fashion.
Back on Orange Lake, Wilson agrees hydrilla needs to be managed, but he says there are other ways, like mechanical harvesting, using machines to remove unwanted plants. FWC says that method accounts for about 25% of its strategy.
Now look how nasty this water is.
Wilson uses a fishing net to scoop up some dark muck oozing up from the lake bottom. UF-IFAS says muck in itself isn't bad, but too much of it will rot, breeding low oxygen conditions and more of the nutrients plaguing Central Florida lakes. Wilson and many of his fellow anglers insist hydrilla is good for Florida lakes, not something to be eradicated. Experts say the truth is more nuanced. One thing that is certain, Central Florida lakes aren't healthy. Wilson says it's past time to solve that problem.
The complete degradation of every freshwater body in Florida is going to eventually, in the near future, touch every pocketbook in this state.
Molly Durig, Central Florida Public Media.
That's it for the wrap this week, but coming up, as elder fraud increases nationwide, Volusia County is working to educate seniors about scams and how to prevent them. Joe Burns looks at those efforts. That's next week here on Central Florida Public Media. Stay listening. This podcast is produced by Central Florida Public Media with assistance from News Director Latoya Dennis and Digital Director Ryan Ellison. I'm Brendan Byrne. This is The Wrap.